drawn and redrawn, the making of India's internal boundaries.
This podcast is part of the India State Stories project that explores the evolution of India's political and administrative boundaries. This is supported by the Center for Legislative Education and Research, Flame University, Pune. Previously, we looked at how different states were gradually integrated into cohesive units and became part of independent India. This fifth and last season will explore the post-integration outcomes and challenges. This episode takes a look into the next step, that is the colossal task of administrative and financial consolidation across India's newly unified states. From creating basic districts in underdeveloped areas to harmonizing vastly different legal and revenue systems, the challenges were immense. This episode is based on a corresponding article written by our team at India State Stories. These articles have been converted into audio conversations with the help of Google's Notebook LM. You can find the relevant article link in the show notes. Let's dive into the conversation.
Okay, just imagine this for a second. You've got this brand new country, right? Independence Day, loads of hope. But then, look at the map. Inside its borders, over 500 mini nations. Yeah, each with its own laws, its own taxes. Some even have their own armies. How on earth do you possibly stitch something like that into one single country? Today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. One of the, most massive nation-building projects ever, really. The administrative and financial integration of India's princely states right after independence in 1947. Our mission is to kind of unpack the complexities, the strategies they use, and the challenges they definitely ran into trying to turn this mosaic of an empire into a unified republic. We'll explore how India navigated this incredible governance and economic jigsaw puzzle.
So, okay, let's really unpack this. How does a brand new nation even begin to pull together, 554 different princely states, administratively, economically, and do it so quickly?
Right. And what's so fascinating, I think, isn't just the scale, that's huge. It's the sheer variety.
Yeah.
The massive difference in how these places were run, financially, too.
You had, really sophisticated states on one end with modern bureaucracies, maybe even better than some British Indian provinces. And then, places with barely any modern system at all. It was this incredible spectrum they had to deal with. It demanded really unprecedented vision and just practical effort.
That's a staggering picture. 554 states, you said. How did they even start integrating them administratively, turning that patchwork into, something functional?
The numbers themselves tell a huge part of the story. From those 554 states, they eventually created just 14 administrative units.
Wow, only 14?
Only 14. Now, this involved a truly massive reorganization. You had 216 states merge into existing provinces.
Yeah.
5 became chief commissioners' provinces, directly administered, and then 310 were grouped into 6 brand new unions of states. This wasn't just drawing lines on a map. It immediately created this urgent need for a complete administrative overhaul everywhere.
And you mentioned the huge differences in how they were run. That mosaic of an empire idea implies massive gaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you paint a bit more of a picture there? What did that spectrum actually look like on the ground?
Absolutely. Look, on one end, you had states like Mysore, Baroda, Travancore, Cochin. These were large, progressive places. Their administration wasn't just good. It was often comparable to, maybe even ahead of, British India in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Sophisticated bureaucracies, laws written down, even legislatures.
Right.
But then, the other extreme, countless smaller states where administration was, primitive. Often deeply personal, run by the ruler directly, lacking any modern structure. Many didn't have proper revenue or land records, or they were poorly kept. Judicial systems could be totally autocratic, no real fairness.
Mm-hmm.
And democracy, mostly non-existent or just for show, with rulers keeping the final say. So integration was fundamentally about erasing those huge disparities, bringing everyone up to a certain minimum standard.
So given that massive range, what were the actual administrative jobs that needed doing? How do you start building a coherent system when some parts barely have, any system?
VP Menon, who was really central to this whole process, he laid out this multi-pronged agenda. It was incredibly ambitious. At its core, it was about, and this is his phrase, the setting up of a proper system of district and sub-district administration in areas which had never known them.
Building from scratch, basically.
Exactly. Creating basic units like districts and then the smaller divisions, taluks or tehsils, local government from the ground up. Then on top of that, standardization. making the police, the revenue collection, the admin structures uniform, sorting out pay scales, service rules, training staff, sometimes removing incompetent ones, and finally bringing order to the chaos of different taxes, different courts, different ways of handling money. It was, a complete institutional rebuild for a huge chunk of the country.
That sounds almost impossible. The practical hurdles must have been immense.
Yeah.
What were some of the biggest difficulties they hit trying to actually do all this?
Oh, huge challenges. One of the biggest, as Menon pointed out, was just the lack of basic administrative units below the state level in many areas. They literally had to, quote, break states into new districts with tessels created afresh. That meant surveying land, creating records where none existed. Imagine.
Yeah.
Then, people. Finding experienced officers was tough. The new All India services, the IAS and IPS, weren't fully up and running yet, so they often had to borrow experienced officers from the old British Indian administration.
Okay.
And here's a detail. You had these old feudal estates, juggers, land grants with special rights. They had to redraw those old feudal boundaries to make sensible districts.
Right, cutting across old power structures.
Exactly. And even just choosing where to put the district headquarters, the Tehsil office,
Yeah.
that could provoke local tensions, Menon said. Decisions were sometimes swayed by caste or regional loyalties, not just what made administrative sense.
Local politics getting in the way.
Absolutely. Plus, you had the whole jigsaw puzzle issue. Territories, scattered little enclaves belonging to one state inside another, made policing and administration a nightmare. They eventually sorted that out by swapping territories.
That paints a picture of incredible practical problems, especially maybe in those state unions where they merged lots of different states together. But surely some local administrators had some skills. Was there pushback against outsiders coming in? How did they manage integrating all these different groups of employees?
That's a really crucial point. The state unions like Rajasthan or PPSU in Punjab, they were the most complex part, largely because of that human element and the sheer diversity. Yes, some parts might have been okay, but many, especially the smaller ones, had those primitive personal administrations. Laws were a mishmash, maybe bits of British Indian code, maybe just the ruler's decree. Lots of different agencies doing the same thing.
Confusing.
Very. And the staff, often just not equipped for a modern democratic government. So when you tried to merge them with staff from more developed states or bring in new standards, well, you got dissatisfaction. Different pay, different qualifications, different work ethics. Sometimes the new ministers, often politicians without administrative experience, acted like, potentates themselves or didn't delegate properly. That led to corruption, inefficiency.
Right.
So they had to build new institutions, high courts, public service commissions from scratch while managing this very difficult integration of existing, often underqualified staff.
So how did they build that administrative capacity
Yeah.
and ensure some level of fairness and impartiality across these really diverse, sometimes unprepared areas, especially with that personnel shortage and all the human tensions?
This is really where the creation of the All India services, the IAS and IPS, became absolutely critical. They were designed specifically to counter those local loyalties, to bring in national standards, to ensure recruitment based on merit, not connections. These services screened the existing officers from the princely states, tried to fix seniority fairly, standardized pay. They set up special recruitment boards to bring in talent from all over India. The idea was to foster a sense of national service, loyalty to India, not just to the old state or ruler.
Makes sense.
And as I mentioned, experienced officers from the central government were often loaned out, deputed to fill key posts and mentor the new ministers and staff in the unions. It was about providing leadership and expertise while building the new system, a very conscious effort to professionalize and standardize things.
Okay, so we've grappled with the administrative jigsaw puzzle, a huge task of building governance structures. But you mentioned the finances. If admin was the skeleton, finance was the lifeblood, and it sounds like that was maybe even messier. How were these states running their economies before integration? Tell us about this financial labyrinth.
Oh, labyrinth is a good word. It was, frankly, economic chaos from a national perspective. A totally fragmented fiscal landscape. Before 1947, these states had complete fiscal independence, so imagine trying to move goods across India. Every few miles, potentially, you hit a border and bam, New taxes, new tariffs, internal customs duties.
Like crossing international borders today, but inside one country?
Exactly. A patchwork of tariffs, excise duties, and internal customs, as it was described. It completely choked internal trade. Even back in the 1930s, a British committee warned this just wasn't sustainable. For any merchant, it meant delays, costs, uncertainty. It really stifled any kind of national economic development.
So a major barrier to growth.
Sure.
And just like the administration, the financial situation varied wildly between states, right?
Yeah.
Some rich, some desperately poor.
Absolutely. Stark disparities. You had maybe 19 states with annual revenues over, say, 10 million a crore of rupees.
Okay, substantial.
But then many, many small ones had incomes like, well, an average artisan's wages, a few thousand rupees a year, perhaps.
Tiny.
Which meant most smaller states, and even some bigger ones, just didn't have the money for modern administration, let alone public services, roads, schools, hospitals. Development was just beyond their means. This created huge pockets of underdevelopment right within the borders of the new India.
So facing this economic mess and these huge gaps, how did the new government of India handle it during those initial accession talks? Did they try and fix the money problems right away?
No, and this was actually a very clever strategic move, a strategic omission, you might call it. During the actual accession process, they deliberately avoided getting bogged down in financial details. The number one goal was political unity, getting the states to sign on the dotted line quickly.
Politics first.
Politics first. So they focused only on defense, foreign affairs, and communications, the absolute essentials for a unified state. They knew the states would resist giving up financial control, and the timeline was incredibly tight. Trying to sort out the finances then would have stalled the whole integration process.
Smart, but it kicked the can down the road.
It absolutely did. They consciously deferred the financial puzzle to solve later, prioritizing getting the political structure in place first.
Okay, a clever strategy. But eventually they had to tackle the money. You couldn't have a unified country with hundreds of different tax systems. That's where the Sarkar Committee came in. What was their initial thinking?
Exactly. Once accession was largely done, they needed a plan. The Constituent Assembly set up the Sarkar Committee in 1947. Their recommendations were quite gradualist. They suggested things like maybe suspending uniform taxation for up to 15 years, getting rid of those internal customs barriers over 10 years.
A slow transition?
Yes, recognizing it would be disruptive. They talked about compensation for states losing customs revenue, applying income tax everywhere, but giving a large chunk back, maybe 75% to the states, central guidance on budgets. But here's the thing. The committee was working on the assumption that the states would keep a fair bit of their internal sovereignty, and events on the ground, the push towards full integration, quickly overtook those assumptions. The political reality changed faster than their financial planning.
Right, so full integration happened much faster than expected. A gradual approach wasn't going to cut it anymore. What was the next step? The more comprehensive financial plan.
This led to a really decisive shift. The government of India basically decided on full financial integration. It would absorb both the assets and the liabilities of the states that merged or formed unions. And the blueprint for this came from the Krishnamurti Committee, set up in 1948-49. They laid out the full integration model.
Okay, what did that involve?
The core idea was equality. Everyone contributes to the federal pot. Everyone benefits equally. They stressed it was about pooling resources, not acquisition by the central government.
Important distinction.
Very. Practically, it meant the union government took complete control over all the main federal revenue sources. Things like railways, income tax, customs duties, posts and telegraphs, currency, audits starting from April 1950. To cushion the blow for states losing revenue streams, they proposed transitional help. Compensation for losses for 5 years, then phasing it out over the next 5. Income tax was brought to parity over 5 years too, with special grants or higher tax shares to make sure states weren't suddenly left short.
Okay, that deals with the state finances. But what about the rulers themselves? They gave up their states. What happened to them? And what about the urgent development needs of these areas, many of which you said were really underdeveloped?
2 key things there. First, the privy purses. These were the annual tax-free payments promised to the former rulers and their successors in exchange for giving up their power and integrating their states. The central government took on the responsibility for paying these. It was a significant financial commitment.
Right, part of the deal.
Part of the deal. Second, development. Beyond just balancing the books, several states got substantial extra grants and aid each year to help them stabilize and develop. Millions of rupees. Travancore Cochin got Rs 280 lakh, Mysore 345 lakh, for example. Some, like Hyderabad, actually ended up with a surplus because their share of taxes was more than they surrendered. And crucially, these former princely states, now called Part B states in the new constitution, became eligible for central funding and technical help under India's big national 5-year plans. That was huge for development.
Access to national resources.
Exactly, and some areas got special focus. Saurashtra, Rajasthan, Madhya at PPSU, because they were often amalgamations of many underdeveloped states, they got specific attention. One committee recommended an extra 8 crore just for those 4, recognizing their particular needs. And interestingly, for some of those unions, PPSU, Rajasthan, Madhya integration actually meant an immediate financial gain because the federal spending in their areas was more than the revenue they gave up. That extra money even helped cover their privy purse obligations.
So a complex system of central control, compensation, grants, and development aid. How did they make sure this was all fair and sustainable in the long run? How did they streamline it?
That was the job of the first Finance Commission, set up in 1951, led by K.C. Niaji. Its role was really important. It was tasked with figuring out the fair share that all states, including the newly integrated Part B states, should get from things like income tax and union excise duties collected by the center.
Setting the formula, basically.
Setting the formula, yes. And recommending additional grants where needed under Article 275 of the Constitution. For instance, they recommended an extra grant of 45 lakh a year specifically for Travancore Cochin. The Commission's work found that for many of these former princely areas, their share of the divisible taxes was actually more than the temporary revenue gap grants they'd been guaranteed. So it helped establish a more stable, predictable, and equitable financial relationship between the integrated states and the center, moving towards a proper federal fiscal system.
So definite advantages there in terms of stability and access to resources. But thinking back, was there a downside to this rapid financial centralization? Did local economic priorities or maybe distinct regional identities get sort of bulldozed in the push for national uniformity?
That's a really insightful question. The Krishnamachari Committee certainly highlighted the big pluses: equal citizenship, central oversight ensuring better financial management, access to development funds, a unified economy without internal barriers, all strengthening national unity.
All good things.
Undeniably. But yes, the speed and the top-down nature of it meant that local economic specificities, maybe unique local taxes or established ways of doing things, were sometimes just overridden by the national template. While necessary for integration, you could argue it potentially caused some friction, maybe a feeling that local needs weren't fully considered, or a loss of that specific regional economic character in some places. It's that classic tension between centralization and local autonomy.
It sounds like an absolutely incredible achievement overall, a real feat of nation building. But you mentioned earlier that VP Menon himself called the administrative side only partially successful. Were there lingering problems, things that maybe the rush to unify overlooked or even created?
You're right to circle back to that. Menon was quite candid. He acknowledged the administrative integration wasn't perfect, only partially successful. Definite weaknesses remain. Key areas like revenue collection, land records and settlement, even basic law and order often stayed weak, especially in those areas that started far behind.
Struggling.
Yes, and problems were often made worse by, as he put it, widespread corruption, nepotism, and political dissensions among ministers in some of the new unions. These were often inexperienced politicians suddenly wielding power. He even mentioned a specific case, a minister in Vindhya Pradesh caught taking kickbacks. So these were real, on-the-ground issues. And there was that haste for uniformity. Ministers sometimes acted as if these new unions were just like the long-established provinces, ignoring decades, sometimes centuries of underdevelopment. This created odd situations like poorly qualified staff demanding the same salaries as provincial staff but expecting lower standards. It highlights the deep human and systemic challenges of trying to merge such different realities so quickly.
So, taking stock then, what's the big picture legacy? What does all this immense effort, administrative, financial, political, ultimately achieve, even with those admitted flaws and challenges?
Look, despite the rough edges, the partial successes, the framework they put in place by 1950 was absolutely vital. It enabled future consolidation under the new constitution. That's key. It ensured that when British paramountcy ended, their ultimate authority over the states just evaporated overnight. It didn't lead to total administrative collapse and chaos. That was a very real possibility.
The safety net almost.
A crucial foundation. And if you connect it to today, you can argue that many of the federal tensions we still see in India, the uneven development between states, some of that can be traced back to this period. The starting line wasn't the same for everyone. States formed from princely territories often had different legacies, different institutional capacities compared to the former British provinces. That asymmetrical foundation has had long-term effects on things like infrastructure, governance, resource debates.
Layering inequalities.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It really underscores the point that state formation isn't just about politics or borders. It's deeply, deeply administrative. This whole process laid the groundwork not just for a unified, centralized India, but paradoxically, also for the later move towards more decentralized administration, like the Panchayat Raj system at the local level.
So, reflecting on all this, what does it really tell us? This deep dive makes it clear that building a nation isn't just drawing lines on a map, is it? Or even just having elections. It's about the incredibly detailed, painstaking work of knitting together systems from the local district office right up to national tax policy and dealing with all the human complexities involved.
Absolutely, and I think it raises a really important point for us. The success of actually holding the territory together, the political integration, it really depended on getting the administrative systems aligned, laws, revenue, personnel. It proves that robust administrative structures are truly the bedrock of political unity. Without that systemic integration, political unity alone can be quite fragile.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about this paradox. The initial integration process was overwhelmingly top-down, a centralizing force, really driven by the urgent need to prevent chaos and forge a single nation out of fragments. Yet that very process laid the essential administrative groundwork that later allowed India to build deeply decentralized democratic structures at the local level. What lessons does that paradox hold for nation-building efforts today anywhere in the world where that balancing act between central authority and local autonomy, local needs, remains such a critical ongoing challenge?